Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with Carly Thibault-DuDonis is brought to you by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And I can tell you firsthand about the great work Compassion is doing because my wife, my daughter, myself, we sponsor a young teenage boy from Haiti, and we're connected with this young boy through Compassion International. It's $38 a month. It's tax deductible, but even more than that, it is an opportunity for you to connect with a child in need and to provide them with hope and release them from poverty. Compassion does it right, one child at a time, carrying Christian adults in the local church. Know that every child by name is meaningful, has a purpose, whether they're sick or well, struggling or excelling. And through Compassion and the local church, they walk each child into discovering their God-given talents and calling. Compassion sponsors like you and I are helping over 2 million children in 25 countries be released from poverty. It's that simple. And here's the cool part. Every child is being discipled in the Word of God. Over 150,000 children choosing to follow Jesus in the last year alone. That's what it's about. So consider sponsoring a child today. $38 a month, tax deductible. Go to compassion.com/sports spectrum, compassion.com/sports spectrum, and sponsor a child today. Really excited on the podcast today to be joined by Carly Thibault-DuDonis. She is the assistant women's basketball coach at the University of Minnesota in the Big Ten. Carly comes from a basketball pedigree. Her dad, Mike, is a longtime NBA and WNBA coach and the current coach of the 2019 WNBA champions, Washington Mystics. Her brother is also an assistant coach on the Washington Mystics, and her husband, Blake, is the head women's basketball coach at the University of Wisconsin River Falls Division III school. So Carly is in and around the game of basketball and certainly coaching basketball. Carly came to Minnesota in April of 2018, spending her previous 2 seasons on Mississippi State's coaching staff, helping the Bulldogs to the national title game in both of the seasons that she was there. She also had stints at Eastern Michigan and Florida State and played collegiately her basketball journey, her career at Monmouth from 2009 to 2013. Carly's got a good story here, and we caught her the day after the Washington Mystics won the title in 2019. Carly literally got on a plane. We're going to have some social media clips online, and you'll be able to see her wearing that championship hat that the Washington Mystics gave out after winning the title. And it was fun to talk to Carly. We caught her right after that. She's in a good mood, of course, but her journey is a really good one, too. Her spiritual journey, which we obviously talk about on Sports Spectrum. And Carly's got a good one. So take a listen to her story here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Carly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on this.
Yeah, this is awesome. And it's a great opportunity to learn about your faith, which we'll do in a minute. But we're taping this on October 11th, so people know, because we're going to be running this in early November. So the day before this was October 10th, and it happened to be a pretty big day, and people who are going to be seeing the social media clips exactly are seeing the hat that you're wearing, which is a WNBA championship hat for the Washington Mystics, and your dad, Mike, is the head coach of that team, and your brother is also an assistant coach. So this is a pretty big deal to get you the day after. How you feeling right now as being a part of a family that won a WNBA championship?
Oh, it's awesome. I'm so glad I was able to be there. My husband and I were both able to go. But I'm just so happy for, first and foremost, my dad. You know, he's really stuck it out. He's been in the league, the WNBA now for 17 years. I think it's his 17th season. So it's his 4th WNBA finals that he's been in and finally won at the end of it all. So, you know, he's really been patient and stuck with it, and, you know, good days, bad days. And I was just so happy to see, you know, him do it. And then obviously my brother's on the staff as well. So it's truly a family affair for us. And, you know, it means that much more when it is with family, and their coaching staff in general is has been together the entire time. Essentially, the core has been there, and they've added really good people. So it's cool just to see a group of really good people do it.
I'm surprised, and I said this to you before we started taping, that you actually have a voice. I think if I was going and watching my dad or my brother or anybody in my family coaching or playing, I would probably be hoarse and maybe even have no voice the next morning. You actually have a voice. So how are you watching these games? Are you screaming and yelling and, getting crazy, or are you really, really just the opposite? Because you have a pretty good sounding voice considering that we're talking the day after.
Honestly, it kind of depends on the moment. I would say the nerves get the best of me when I'm not on the bench. If I'm coaching and I'm a part of the team, I can kind of keep it together. But for some reason, when I'm a spectator, I'm not quite as sane. So I'll be really, really quiet. Sometimes when I'm really nervous, I'll get quiet, and then I just kind of have short little outbursts here and there. If we go on a run or they go on a run, it's little outbursts, but I don't sit and yell the whole game. I can't do it. I get too nervous.
It's so amazing. Well, it's so cool.
But as a coach, I'm fine.
Exactly. It's interesting because is that just I don't know. Are you kind of locked in? I'm guessing because you played ball as well. Is that just sort of, okay, this is my moment to kind of lock in, whether you're playing, whether you're coaching, and if it means yelling, if it means screaming, if it means just whatever I have to do to help my team, you're kind of locked in. Whereas a fan, you really have no control. You're just up there kind of doing your thing, right?
Yes. It's actually funny. My brother and I have talked about it. So when I was at Mississippi State and we were in the Final Four, he used to say that was the most nervous he'd ever been watching games was when it was my games. And that's how I feel with them. Like you said, you're kind of locked in when it's your team. You feel like you can help and make suggestions and do all that. But as a fan, it's like you're helpless.
Yeah. You were a part of that team you mentioned in Mississippi State that went all the way to the final game, the national championship game. You were an assistant coach there. Compare and contrast the experiences of that with watching this run that your dad and your brother made with the Mystics.
It's so fun because, again, it's just doing it. It's always special when you do it. For me, it was really cool to see how both programs when I was at Mississippi State and my dad's Mystics teams, just kind of the building of, kind of what the foundation and what goes into, 7 years later or 5 years later when you're winning. And so I wasn't there for the first initial years at Mississippi State, but I got to be a part of kind of the last 2 to 3. And it was just fun to see, what the building was all for. And so the same thing with my dad and my brother, I got to see, each trade, each move, each draft pick, how that all led to yesterday.
From a player perspective, what Elena Delle Donne did last night, and I say last night because a lot of people will be hearing this in a month or so, but I still think it's worth asking just from a person who's inside and kind of knows the game of basketball really well. What she was able to do last night, just from a playing perspective, is pretty incredible, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, she's a warrior. She's played through so many injuries last year. My heart just broke for her when I heard her back was obviously in a bad way because she went through the same thing last year with her knee. And so, you just want it so bad for her because she does it the right way. She works her butt off. And she's just a warrior. She's playing with 3 herniated discs and a face mask and a knee brace, So again, I think the group is so deserving for what they've put into it and what they had to do to get here.
You ever play with an injury remotely close to that?
I actually, in high school, I broke my nose going into the state tournament. So I played my whole state tournament with a face mask and some meniscus issues. But just most of mine were nagging injuries, nothing quite like a herniated disc.
Oh, I can't imagine trying to run up and down. I'm old enough to remember Larry Bird watching him play, and he had to sit on the sidelines on his stomach just to kind of survive when he wasn't playing and then go in. Its back injuries are brutal for basketball players. They are,
and
brutal.
Especially as someone that you're taking a beating from, every game, and you're essentially a post player, so people can kind of beat on your back a little bit.
Right, the weakness, what hurts, so go right into them. Absolutely. Now you're married to Blake, who you said you watched the game with him in person last night, and he's also a coach. So there's a lot of coaching in this family, Carly. And currently he's the head women's basketball coach at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, Division III. And you'll clear this up pretty quickly. But when I saw that, I said, okay, he's in Wisconsin and you're in Minnesota. how the heck do you make that work from a marriage perspective? But it's actually a lot easier than I thought, right?
Yeah, so he took the job in May, I believe, of this past year, and the reason he honestly, even looked into it in the first place was we were not really going to do anything where we lived in separate places. He quit and moved to Mississippi with me so that we didn't have to do the long distance thing, especially early in our marriage. And so when we moved up here, then he saw that Wisconsin River Falls was open and saw that it was only 45 minutes away, or about 40 minutes away. So it's an easy commute for him. He's just got to go right across the border, and the Twin Cities are actually a lot closer to the Wisconsin border than I had realized originally. So it's an easy commute, and it's honestly, we call it a God thing, because I don't think it could have worked out any better. You couldn't have planned it any better. It was a huge leap of faith to come to Minnesota in the first place. And a huge part of that was, a life decision as much as a career decision. And for us to be able to both work and do what we love. And it couldn't have worked out any better if we had planned it ourselves.
So I've been married almost 20 years. By the time this podcast airs, it'll be close to 20. And my wife and I could not be more opposite in what we do, in the personalities. How do you guys make this work? You're both coaches. So I wonder, are you constantly talking basketball? Do you leave work at work and come home and try to get away from that world? That's got to be tough when you're both kind of doing the same thing. What's that like?
It's really amazing. I think early in my coaching career, when I was, maybe in relationships, I didn't understand that it was an odd way of life to be a coach, because it's all I'd known with my dad and my mom being obviously a great support system for my dad. I didn't realize that it was a different way of life with long hours and traveling. I just kind of thought that's what it was for most. And so, early in my young adult life, it was just, I didn't understand why that would be hard for people at times to understand that. But, obviously being married to a coach, I don't have to explain the long hours, and I don't have to explain the being on the phone at night and being away for days at a time. So that part is a blessing. And then it is nice to be able to come home and, maybe there's times I'm asking if I'm being irrational about something, or if my line of thinking is right, or if I could do something a different way, and he can give unbiased opinions, which is really helpful at times, and vice versa. Yeah,
that's true. I can't really go to my wife and say, show me how to do this interview better, because she's never really interviewed anybody. It's not her profession. Yep. So I guess there is blessings, and certainly there's curses in some ways too in that. But Carly, let me ask you about your faith. Carly Thibault is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Your Twitter page says, I am second, which those in the faith, I think, know what that means. Maybe those outside don't. And I think it's a wonderful way to kind of have somebody ask you, what does I am second mean? And allows you to share your testimony. So this is a Faith in Sports podcast, a Faith in Sports brand that we have with Sports Spectrum. So tell us about I am second, that motto, and your faith journey.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start, my mom kind of really started me in my faith young. She was really kind of instrumental in me asking questions about God and learning about my faith in general. And then I think I really dove more into it once I met my husband, to be honest. When we first met, we were friends for about a year before we ever actually started dating. And there was just something so different about him. And he was just a very selfless, genuine person. And I always knew that I believed in God. I always knew that, I knew that I wanted to commit my life to Christ, but I just didn't know how to do it, if that makes sense. And so when we first really started to date, we really connected on a spiritual level. And for me, he really showed me what it looks like to kind of just give your life up to God and kind of let the hard things and the hard days, let them go up to God. And I just didn't know how to do that. And so it's been really, for me, it's a daily journey to figure out what that means in coaching. And I'm sure, that's probably, it's a daily journey for everybody, but, finding out how I walk my daily walk in a really busy, schedule daily, and how I can really continually let God into my profession, into, my relationships. I think that's where the I am second for me comes really strong in my relationships with our players and our staff and the people around me. is just constantly putting, I'm second. And so, again, it's a daily thing for me to figure out what that means, but, and I'm growing.
Well, that's good. Tell me, okay, so you played college ball at Monmouth, right? 2009 to 2013. At what point, where are you meeting your husband in your journey here? How old are you and what stage of life are you in?
So I'm 28. We met 4 or 5 years ago now. We've been married 2 years. We got married May of 2017. Okay. And so we were coaching against each other, actually. I was coaching at Eastern Michigan. It was my first year there, so that would have been 2014, I believe. And we met my first year there, and we were both actually on the road recruiting in Ohio. And we sat next to each other at an event and just kind of talked, and then we stayed in touch throughout the year. While we actually coached against each other that year. He was at Buffalo, and so we were both on the MAC.
Did you win?
So it's actually a story in itself. So okay. This is kind of where, honestly, a lot of times, people find their faith when there's rock bottom. And so middle of the year at Eastern Michigan, we lost one of our players to a car accident after a big win. And so it was a drunk driving accident, and we lost one of our players. And there's no, handbook in coaching on how to deal with something like that. Yeah. And the first thing that really sticks out in my relationship with my husband now is just that, a lot of people in times like that, they'll text you, they'll say, I'm here for you, they'll send you messages. But other than my family, Blake, it was the first person to just pick up the phone and call me and basically say, if you need anything, I'm here. And it just kind of really set, apart for me. And so we grew closer after that. We were just friends at the time, but we grew closer. And so then we actually played Buffalo about a week later. So it was a couple of days after the funeral. And so he was there in the arena when we showed like the tribute video. And I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And we actually ended up losing that game. So I say I lost with a caveat because, obviously the circumstances were a little grim and obviously a really hard time for a lot of our girls and our staff. But that's where honestly we started to grow closer after that, just because of where his heart is, and again, there's something so different about him. So we did coach against each other once, and then the rest is history.
Well, that's a crazy circumstance, and obviously a terrible tragedy when you hear that story. What are you learning from a moment like that, from an experience like that? Because as a coach, you got to kind of almost put on the facade of, it's not really a facade, but you got to be there for your players, right? And you almost have to play guidance counselor, and you have to play big sister and mom and all these other things other than just coach. And I'm sure questions about faith, even just kind of what's going on here, God, why would you allow this, come into play here? So walk us through like that level of emotions from your perspective as a coach on dealing with something like that and going through something like that.
Yeah, it was just you had to take it day by day, because you never knew what that day was going to bring, who was going to have a hard time, and you just had to, again, put people first. They're people, you winning games doesn't matter at that point. And so I know I really grew in relationships at that point, and being there for our team and for each other. But you do talk about faith in times like that, because you don't know why something like that happens, but at the same time, you give it up to God and know that there's a plan bigger than what at that time, and you're just seeing one little snippet, and there's a reason for everything. I truly believe that, and I reiterated that to our players and let them know that I was there for them. And again, like I said, there's no handbook. You just figure it out day by day, and you're there for them when they need you. And you become closer in times like that with your players and the people you work with. So yeah, again, it's crazy after you go through something like that, all the little things that you don't even think about, like, what do you do with the player's jersey, and what do you do with their locker, and how do you honor them every game? And you just have all these things that you're like, oh gosh, you would never think of. And so now I've kind of used those experiences. If there's ever a tragedy on another team, I typically will reach out to the staff and say, if there's anything I can help with, by all means, I use me, lean on me. I can help, and I've been through it. So.
You said when you met your husband, not met him, but kind of grew in your relationship with him, that also kind of introduced you and maybe kind of changed in the way that you grew closer to God and kind of forming a relationship with Christ. So tell me, was this a catalyst for that in a lot of ways, this going through this incident? Because you're already starting to think about matters of faith. It's kind of natural. Everybody, I think, when there is a tragedy, gravitates towards that a little bit. And then you meet him, you start dating him, and that faith aspect. I'm trying to understand your journey, because I think our journeys are all evolving. I tell people all the time, every day we're learning something new, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But where is the catalyst to really just saying, you know what, this is something I got to figure out, get right, at least from the beginning, and then have the journey? But where's the catalyst to really just decide and say, you know what? Yes, God. Yes. I say yes to you.
I think for me, like I said, my mother kind of introduced me to being a Christian and what that means. But I'd never seen, I think with my husband, and when we first really started to get to know one another, I had never seen a true, like someone have a relationship with God until him. I didn't know what a relationship with God meant, and just, the daily prayer and about everything big and small. I had never seen that up front, up close and personal before. And he kind of showed me what that looks like just in his daily actions, more lead by example than anything. He's very strong in his faith. And so I would see him, maybe just pray over a very small decision or a really big decision. And so I got to see what a relationship with God looks like. And that's really, I think, where I grew the most, as far as, it's a daily, by the minute relationship, not, your prayer before a meal type of thing. And so I think that was kind of the catalyst for me, is just seeing him and what that looks like for him. And then we were really blessed. We found a really good church in Michigan. We made some amazing lifelong friendships in that church. And so I think paired with that is where I really kind of grew the most. We found a church that people were very intentional about relationships and community. And so I think that, those two together is where I really kind of took some steps in faith.
So you have a lot of examples of coaching, certainly from your dad and your brother, Carly, and now your husband, and certainly you're a coach yourself. But intersect that with faith for a minute. Obviously, you have to be careful. I worked at a very large place at ESPN for many years, where I just don't walk in there and bring my Bible and then put a cross on my shirt and tell people about Christ. You can't do that. That's not what my job was. I was hired to do my job there. You're hired to be a coach at Minnesota. But you just said something that caught my ear. You said it's an all the time thing. And so that means it comes with you wherever you go, whether you're coaching or at home. So walk us through how you balance that, how you kind of bring your faith without, again, preaching or forcing anything ever, which we don't ever want to do, but bringing that faith in with you to the influence that you have on your kids. How does your faith help you coach all of that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think you just have to you have to walk the walk, first and foremost. And again, I think they say that in the sense that it's a daily, everyday growth process, to consistently do that. But it's just, you have to walk the walk and do things the right way if you're going to call yourself a Christian, And so I really try to do that. And then all my players know, where I stand in my faith. And if they, ever want to talk about it, they know that my door is always open. If they want me to pray for them, my door is always open. They just kind of know that about me. And, I've made that, I've opened that door for them if they ever want to discuss anything, around God, or if they want to, if they ever want to come over to my house and do a Bible study, they just know that is always an option. And again, I won't ever force it on anybody. But they just know the option is there. And I think it's cool. Our staff in general, we would pray before every game last year. And again, every athlete knew it's optional. They don't have to. But if they want to, that, the option is there.
That's good. That's good. Carly Thibault is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. A couple more questions. You talked about talking to your players. So you're not far removed from where many of these young women are in college right now, just 28 yourself. What have you seen is their biggest challenge or their biggest obstacle, just living in 2019 as a female college basketball player? And, you know, it's not that long ago that you played, but yet there's so much that has changed probably in 6 or 7 years. So what are you seeing that a lot of these players kind of struggle with and kind of go through on this journey of being a college ball player and trying to figure out life and go to college at the same time?
I think that first semester freshman year is just always, I don't care whether it was 50 years ago or now, I think it's just always hard. And so I think, you know, first that hasn't changed, because I know for me when I played, and I know pretty much most freshmen that I coach, that first semester is always just a tough one because it's all new. You're not the big fish in a small pond anymore. And you've got classes to juggle and time management, and, you know, everything's just ramped up by 10. And so I think that's where I've you know, I can help in a lot of ways, is that it's not going to always stay this hard. You just have to get through that first semester, get it under your belt, and it'll be okay. But then I think in a lot of ways it's different than when I played. Like, recruiting is so different from how I was recruited. It's just so much more involved, where you're on their social media and you're texting and you're Snapchatting and you're on Instagram and there's just so many ways to overwhelm them. That it, you know, and then when you get there, you get a dose of reality, because you also recruited 3 other players around you. And so it's a little bit different in for me, how I was recruited. I wasn't a super highly recruited player as it is. And so I can't relate to necessarily being super overwhelmed. I had to fight for I even had to fight for my scholarship at Monmouth. So it's a little bit crazier now with the social media. I'm thankful that I didn't have really social media until like my sophomore, junior year of college.
I can imagine. And so much has changed, right? Yeah,
it has. And especially I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
You know, their brains are still developing and making really good decisions all the time, when, you know, emotions can get high at the end of a game or end of a practice, and really helping them mature to make really good decisions when, you know, you can't take something back that you put on social media. It's, you know, it just is what it is.
So how do you lead as a coach in this world of distraction? What does that look like?
I think Coach Whalen does a really good job of it, of just, you know, she's been in their shoes. She's played high level basketball everywhere in the world. And so just really teaching as far as, you know, how we conduct ourselves, how we're leaders in the community. We have a gold standard that Coach Whalen, it's less not so much a book of rules as it is a list of standards that you just conduct yourself in daily life, whether it's on the court or off the court. So being good to one another is we call it GOLD, and it's an acronym. The G is good to one another, the O is outwork, the L is leadership, and the D is discipline. And those 4 things kind of encompass, you know, not putting anything out there on social media that's disrespectful or not, you know, good to a teammate, or not being a good leader. So those are just daily conversations within our program.
Oh, that's really good. Let me ask you the last couple of questions here. For you, spiritually, obviously your husband's a big, important part of that. I'm guessing your mom is too, having planted those seeds. But what does that look like for you daily as a coach? I love asking this question to coaches because they pour so much into others. They're emptying their tank, it seems, and every day, whether you're assistant, a head coach, whatever it is, how do you stay fed spiritually and find that encouragement in your life each day?
Yeah, so I think that's something, again, that I ebb and flow a little too much, but I actually got really into, I have it on my desk at all times, my Tony Dungy Uncommon Life Daily Challenge, the devotional. So I love that. Yep. So I try to daily, you know, go through a devotional and then journal about it, just to kind of start my day off with, you know, on the right note. And it's something that, again, there's some, you know, a week will go by and I'm like, oh man, I need to get back to this. But that's kind of been my way of coming in the office, starting with that, and just, like I said, kind of getting my mind right to start the day.
No, that's good. All right. Last question, Carly. This has been really great spending time with you. What is the Lord teaching you today? We ask that to all of our guests here. He teaches us something new, it seems, every day. You could literally open up that Dungy devotional and learn something new every day. So today, what is he teaching you right now in the season of life that you're in?
I think for me, it's just patience. I think it's a daily thing and you're going to have a million things that come at you and you can't do them all at once. And continuing to find, time for relationships. Again, I think even today it's a really good example as I'm flying back and then I'm flying out tonight and we have practice and I've got to get things done for recruiting. And it's like, it'll all get done, but still don't miss out on, a player coming into your office and talking or going down on the court early to get a few shots up with some of the players and just chatting with them. So kind of slowing down and being patient and everything will get done. It's okay. Don't stress, but
That's good.
But still be very centered in relationships with the people around you.
That's cool. You want to be a head coach someday?
I don't know.
You don't know? Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that.
I'm not going to say yes or no. I think in the right situation, but I'm just not rushing it. I love where I'm at. I really feel for the first time that I'm where I'm supposed to be, exactly where I'm supposed to be.
That's really good.
And I'm not rushing through that,
No, I love that. And I was hesitating even to ask it, but I just know, a lot of us have dreams and desires and wanting to do things, but at the same time, I think the Lord puts us in places for reasons in every walk of life, and He's got you right where He wants you right now, Carly. So good stuff. Thank you so much for being here on the show. I really appreciate it, and we'll wish you nothing but the best, and certainly hope for a great season this year for Minnesota as the Gophers get ready for a 2019-2020 season. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really humbled and honored that you asked me.
That was Carly Thibault-DuDonis joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Really appreciate Carly's heart for others, certainly her heart for God, and just good stuff there from Carly coming on the podcast and sharing her story and sharing her journey. She's on Twitter, and that's actually how I connected with her. Honestly, somebody had mentioned her name or connected me to her through Twitter and looked her up and simply saw God, family, basketball, and I am second. And I thought, well, I want to hear about Carly's journey. And I had known, certainly heard about her dad and coaching and the pedigree that exists in the Thibault family. So really cool to have Carly share her story. She's just getting started. Can't wait to see where God takes her, certainly her husband Blake as well, on their coaching journeys. And certainly the Lord at the center will direct it all. So give her a follow on Twitter. She's simply at CTBOW, CT, and then the word BOW. You'll find her there. Carly Thibault joining us here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Thanks to Carly, and thanks to our sponsors, Compassion International, for sponsoring this podcast. $38 a month, tax deductible, a chance to release a child from poverty, food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in Jesus' name. I say that a lot on this podcast, but think about what I just said. You can make that difference by sponsoring a child, and your $38 a month, tax deductible, provides food, education, medical care, and vocational training. $38 a month. If we could all live on $38 a month, think about that. Food, education, medical care. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And yet that's what Compassion does. It connects you, the sponsor, with a child in need. Go to the website, compassion.com/sportspectrum, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Pray about it. I promise you, you will never regret $38 a month with the most trusted child development ministry in the world, Compassion International. We really do appreciate you joining us here on Sports Spectrum. Check out our website, sportspectrum.com. That's where all of our content can be found. Daily devotionals every morning at 6 a.m. Eastern to start your day right with God. You can also read all sorts of articles on there. I mean, we got content that goes back 30 plus years on our website, and every podcast is found there as well. You can also click that subscribe button on whatever app you're listening to the podcast on right now. Click that subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. And lastly, I want to tell you about our magazine, Sports Spectrum Magazine, a quarterly magazine that's been around for, again, 30 plus years, 34 years to be exact. And it's a quarterly magazine, really well done magazine. And there's still something about holding a magazine in your hand and handing it to someone else and showing them these awesome images of our athletes and people that we watch on TV in the world of sports. And then they open it up, they read it, and they realize these guys are playing for a greater purpose, that there's something different about these athletes. They play for the Lord. And so consider subscribing to Sports Spectrum magazine. It's $18. That's it, $18 for an entire year, basically a $20 bill, and you are into the Sports Spectrum magazine. And you can subscribe by simply going to sportsspectrum.com. You'll see a big ad right at the top there that says $18. You can click that and you are in. sportsspectrum.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time with a new episode on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Have a great rest of your day.